Hello art students. We are going to do a series of practice activities to get familiar with different painting techniques using this sphere as our reference image. So we only have to focus on recreating the values in a gray scale. So to get started, fill your palette with lots of white and black paint so that you can create at least 4 to 5 different grays from the lightest light to the darkest dark. To create your lightest gray, you're going to start with white and gradually add more and more black, and then you'll reverse it to get your darkest grays. The first technique I'm going to show you is hard edge or flat style. For all of these practice activities, you'll need to start with a circle, so find something round that you can trace. A roll of tape or a drinking glass work really well, and then lightly trace that circle in pencil. For flat edge, we want to use a rounded brush because we're going to be creating the different shapes that each of the values make in this sphere. So we're going to pencil in those shapes, and then we're going to use that rounded brush to outline each of those shapes and fill them in using the different grays that we've mixed, starting with the darkest and then working our way to the lightest gray. So we're going to maintain the hard edge in between the values with no blending in between. Each of those values will have a very clean, hard edge. The next technique I'm going to show you is called wet into wet blending. For this technique, we are going to create gradual transitions in values by blending wet paint into more wet paint. So in our sphere, there are very subtle changes from light to dark called gradations. And so we are going to use a flat brush to blend one value into the next value. So because we're creating these values, we want to start off with just a few grays. We don't want to put all of the grays down. So maybe just your white, your medium light gray, and then your darkest gray, and then a black. And you want to do a thick application of paint because it needs to stay wet for this process to work. And then you're going to use a clean brush, and where the two values meet and form a line, you're going to work your brush in one direction to blend the values out. So again, every place where two values meet, you're going to clean off your brush and then blend it out. So notice I'm cleaning my brush every time I go, and then for really light values you might need to wash it off first and then dry it. So for the sphere, we're going to start with an underpainting of a medium value or a mid-tone, and then let that paint dry completely so that we have something to kind of create a barrier so that the paint isn't just soaking into the paper. And then again, we're not going to put down every single value we've mixed on our palette. We're going to just put down white, a mid-tone gray, and then maybe our darkest gray. And really, really thick application of paint. And then pay attention to the general kind of shape that those main values make. You don't want to just put them down randomly. You want to kind of pay attention, and then get your darkest value. So really I just have 3 grays down on my sphere because I know that I'm going to be, in the process of blending, I'm going to be mixing or blending all of the in-between values with my brushwork. So I am going to use my biggest brush. I'm starting off with my round brush here, and I'm just starting with that first kind of edge between the white and the gray. And I'm going to switch to my largest flat brush because I'm noticing that it gives me a better effect. And I can get really, really light and almost kind of feathery with it. So I'm using very minimal pressure, and I'm just going every place I see a little edge between, like a hard edge in between the values, I'm just taking that brush and using a really, really feathery kind of stroke to the brush. And then I might need to go back in and add a little bit more of paint, a little bit more of a value if I notice that, in the course of the blending, it got a little too dark in that spot. If your paint starts to dry, you might need to do that also. So I'm going to take a little bit of that sort of dark, not quite black, gray there, because the paint started to dry on me. And then I'm doing the same thing. I'm wiping my brush off every time I go in to blend. I'm wiping it off, so I'm removing excess paint. And so I'm wiping it off now, and I'm going to go in between these two values and use that really, really gentle kind of touch after applying a little bit more of that light value. So you're going to need to kind of, add a little bit here and there. Again, especially if you're working on a large area and your paint starts to dry, just remember you're wiping off your brush. Every time you go in to blend, you want to just wipe that brush off. And then very, very light touch with that flat brush. If you have a smaller area of your painting, then switch out to a smaller brush so that you have more control. Otherwise, it's the same process, it's the same technique. So bigger brush for bigger areas, smaller brush for smaller areas. You'll notice that the edges of my sphere are a little rough. So if I wanted to clean that up later on, I could do that when I paint the background and when I paint the tabletop. So I can use that background paint and then the tabletop paint to tighten up the edge of the sphere so that the edge is a little cleaner. And you can see that here with my shadow, how it tightened up that edge. The next technique is called scumbling or dry brush. For this technique, you actually need to start by filling in your circle with your medium gray and allowing it to dry completely. That way you've got something that you can begin to scumble into. For scumbling, you need a totally dry brush and you need a flat brush. And for this technique, you also need a piece of scratch paper so that you can tap off any excess paint. The key is to keep the brush dry at all times and use minimal paint. We'll be working light into dark. And so we'll start with white, and we're just tapping our brush into that white paint, and then we're actually going to tap off some of the excess so that we just barely have paint on the bristles. The paint should have a scratchy quality as you scumble it in. To scumble, you're going to use a scribbling motion or tight circles, working your way from the left to the right, because we're working light to dark here. To get in close to the edge, you're just going to angle your brush towards that edge of the circle. And then you're just going to tap your brush again into the paint to just get enough that it has that scratchy quality, and you can scumble it using tight circles moving to the right. Then gradually get darker with your values, paying attention to your reference image and where each of those values fall in the sphere. Again, your brush should be dry at all times. You're not going to use your water at all for this technique. And you're going to use those tight circles, tapping off excess paint onto your scratch paper so that your transitions are really smooth but have a bit of a scratchy quality to them.